All right, all right, all right. So one more time on thinking out loud. Um, this time, as some of you know, we'll have Jesse Menin as our next guest. Uh, and Jesse used to work for, I mean, used to, no, sorry, Jesse works for Solas in the office of the CTO. And I think that why am I introducing him myself when he can introduce himself better than I, right? So, uh, welcome, Jesse. You
Thanks,
might
Fran. Glad to be here.
you might want to introduce yourself because I'm very bad at introducing people. So,
Sure. So I work for the office of the CTO here at Solace, and my job encompasses a lot of things, but also encompasses interacting with the open source community, and certainly async API is a huge part of that. And we also have contacts with cloud events and with open telemetry. So that keeps me busy, but really happy to be here because we think async API is obviously really important as an event broker company, and excited to talk about it.
yeah. So, well, thanks for those words. It actually is important for a broker company. I couldn't think of a like better company or a better product that async API can be like suiting more perfectly, right? Like brokers actually were the reason why async API was created. So you're
Sure.
totally right. So yeah. So before, just so you know, before jumping live, Jesse was just challenging me with the game. You mind explaining, or what do you want to? How do you want to trick me?
Sure. I will say that I am an American, in case you couldn't tell, but I work for Solace as a Canadian company, and I love Canada. I grew up just across the border from Canada in Michigan, which is a state in the U.S. So I've always had a fascination with Canada. And I feel like Canada has a greater cultural influence than people give it credit for. So what we have here, and I'll share my screen now, is just a brief quiz for Fran. That is, there we go, I'm sharing my screen, called Name That Canadian. I think people can see the screen. Yeah, it's a musical edition. Yeah, we'll leave the movie stars for a future date. And so we have 5 photos of Canadian musical acts. And so we know Fran is excellent technically, but how well do you know Canadians? So we'll start. Are you ready? Are you mentally prepared for this?
I'm mentally not prepared for anything.
Well, we're gonna do it anyway. I don't even know why I asked that question.
I'm just want to say that I'm sorry that you're American.
I feel that way a lot too, actually.
I mean that I was going to say something bad. That guy, I actually know him. So yeah, it's Justin Bieber. Yeah.
Let's see. You are correct. It is Justin Bieber. All right, here's the next one. Yeah, a little more challenging because she's actually a lot thinner than you may remember her, but I think you can probably still get this.
Oh, I have no idea.
No?
Oh my God. Who's this woman?
Think about it. I'll give you a hint.
Yeah.
Near, far, wherever you are.
No, really? So yeah. What was the name of this group?
Fran,
is this from the soundtrack of Titanic?
Yeah.
Yeah. What was the name of this woman? I can't remember. Celine Dion. Yeah. Exactly.
Celine Dion. All right. Next, I'll be interested to know if you know this, because this will give you insight into your musical taste as well.
Think I know. I mean, I'm not into the latest rap music trends.
He's a rapper.
Yeah, I can. You could guess it by looking at him only. But yeah,
Drake.
I love rap music. As I told you before, jumping live, I used to break dance professionally for 10 years. So I listen to a lot of rap, even while coding. But
Nice.
that's why you can guess. I mean, this way you can guess that when I was rapping and when I was hearing rap while coding and not, because you can see that my code completely like smells.
It gets
Because I'm
worse
just
as
like,
you listen to rap. Got it.
and
Got it.
I don't know what I'm typing.
By the way, we won't touch on it here, but you should ask Fran about the callus on his head from breakdancing. I mean, that shows real dedication to the craft of breakdancing. I was saying that I am bald as well, but not for cool reasons, just because like that's how I am. Fran actually earned his baldness, so congratulations on that. This is a hard one. Even Canadians don't get this one, so we'll go through this. This is a rock band called Nickelback.
But don't tell me the names. I mean, isn't it a quiz?
Well, do you know Nickelback?
Of course. I mean, I used to listen to Nickelback a lot when I was younger.
Well, there you go. I assumed.
Nah, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I don't know who these guys are.
Yeah, even Canadians don't know these guys. So, and we're getting to the really hard part. This is an old school classic rock band named Rush.
So I know the guy on the left. He's
Yeah, and the
probably
guy
an
in the middle is
actor.
Geddy Lee. Yeah,
Who's this guy?
the guy in the middle is Geddy Lee. He is like the world's most famous like Canadian singer guy.
But
So
but the, but the guy on the left, is he an actor or something?
no, he's
I mean,
actually just like a musician as a member of Rush.
I know his face from somewhere. I don't know.
I think you did comparatively pretty well. So
So I actually love it. I loved it that you did this quiz to introduce, um, to introduce yourself and to introduce Canada. I
yeah,
freaking love Canada, but I don't know Canada so much. Uh, I know just I only visited once, um, and now you're gonna kill me because I don't remember the name of the city because I'm super bad with names. I have this problem, and it's a famous one, so it's not a small one. Um, I it happens to me the other day it happened to me that I had to Google, I had to search for the name of Australia because I couldn't remember Australia. So imagine
wow,
that to that point. So yeah, Vancouver, of course. So
Vancouver, nice.
yeah, Vancouver. So I've only been in Vancouver. Yeah, Jonathan knows Vancouver. We've been there. Actually, I think I still have his his laptop connector at home, maybe somewhere. There's always
There's always like stuff left behind.
yeah,
Those are business trips right there. There's always
yeah.
something left behind.
So yeah, so Jonathan, now that you're watching as, it would be better if you buy multiple, uh, you know, plaques and you spread them all around the world. So it's gonna be
For sure,
cheaper.
for sure. Yeah. Why pack when you can just like distribute them everywhere?
Just kidding. So yeah, cool. So thanks a lot for this game. I actually appreciate it. Um, so now back to the, or not back, but let's go into the topic of the episode, which is about publish and subscribe. So some of you already know that I started this show, if you want. Is I call it the most boring show because it's not about show. It's about thinking, right? And seeing other people thinking on the screen is not fun at all, or might not be, right? It doesn't have the television rhythm. So I started this as a way to ask the community to come up with creative solutions for the publish and subscribe challenge that we're having on Async KPI. Just to summarize for those who are not familiar, so when you see publish on an Async KPI document, it doesn't mean that your application is publishing a message. It means that a potential client can publish messages to you. So that's highly confusing. Same for subscribe. If it says subscribe, it means that a potential client can subscribe to your application. But given that your application might be another client of the broker, then it's where uh, you know it becomes chaotic. This definition becomes chaotic and difficult to understand. It all comes inherited from OpenAPI, because OpenAPI, the relationship is clear. So we have a server, we have a client, we are defining the server, we're not defining the client with OpenAPI, and therefore it's easy to understand. If you see get, post, put, wherever, it doesn't mean that your server code is doing a get request somewhere. It means that you accept a get request, and that's where the similarity comes from, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, so it works well if you have a client server architecture in async API as well. So if you have a WebSocket server, it makes total sense, because it means that you defining a server, and therefore you can publish message to the server, or you can subscribe to messages coming from the server. So it still makes sense in these cases. But in the cases of clients, broker clients, it totally doesn't make sense. So it is highly, it can make sense somehow, um, but yeah, it's highly confusing.
Yeah, and
And
let me say that we have a new developer relations person, Geary, who's fantastic at Solace, and I was sort of like walking him through async API yesterday, actually, and we were doing a demo, and it came to the point where I had to explain to him sort of the publish and subscribe, and literally the thing out of his mouth was, "Oh my God." It was like he was like distraught. So yes, and I think you and I have both, you at least are a smart guy. I'm kind of a smart guy. Like even today, like sometimes I like, encounter things where like, oh no, I got that wrong. Like when I'm trying to like, write out an async API document or explain it to someone, like I will forget the publish and subscribe meanings in sort of in everyday conversation. So yes, it's a problem for new users and existing users.
And it's highly confusing. It's not just a problem because it's highly confusing, but it's also limiting the spec in some cases, let's say, right? So it is also like inconsistent in many cases. Like sometimes some tooling are detecting that the protocol is WebSocket, and they're instantly assuming that what you want to create, the code that you want to generate, is a server. But if you have other protocol like, I don't know, like Kafka or MQP or MQTT or whatever, they instantly assume that what you want to create is a client. And obviously, because you don't want to create a broker, you don't want to generate the code for a broker. Usually, that's not you.
Yeah, totally.
Maybe it will be cool for you if you have a code generator for your broker.
We'd love that. That'd be huge for revenue. Just have like brokers.
Exactly that. Generate Solas. And
yes, exactly.
Then I can relax now, right?
Stock options would be amazing. So yes, as much as we would like that, probably not the best solution for us back.
So that's not usually the case. And the thing is, what if you want to have a WebSocket client that connects to a broker through WebSocket, for instance? This is also possible in many brokers. I think Solus is also allowing WebSocket connections.
Sure. So we don't actually, but that's probably a good idea that I should write down in a.
You don't? So
I know. We're working on it. Yeah.
Feature request. So yeah, I mean, it's not usually the case WebSockets with brokers, because WebSockets are meant for web, right? For websites, for web pages, and brokers are more meant to be internal and not accessible from the public. So yeah, I can see why they're not playing well together. But
I mean, I think that is really sort of the. And sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, Brian, but I think that is actually really the diversity of the ways that you can implement async communication is really like the awesome thing about asynchronous communication. And really the challenge, like you are obviously the founder, and you bit off this huge task to like try to encompass all these different ways of asynchronous communicating asynchronously. And so in ways, it's a cool task, but it's a very a challenge. And I think as a community, that's sort of our challenge as well now, that like, how can we encompass like so many different ways of capturing that type of communication, whereas REST, the open API guys actually have it kind of easy, because it's always going to be HTTP. It's always going to be sort of the same URL. I know that, Lorna, forgive me, I know that there's webhooks now, but that complicates things. I know Lorna's going to come back at me, but like, in a way, because they have a more constrained, it's always server client, like that actually is a simpler use case, and that's still a pretty complicated spec. But now we, as async API, have to encounter all this additional complexity, which you're hinting at right now.
Yeah, so exactly. So that's the whole thing, right? Like, so when I started async API, I started this for RabbitMQ. My use case was to make it work with RabbitMQ. Actually, in version 1, the channels were called topics, and the syntax was using dots, as in Rabbit, as in AMQP, I would say, right? So yeah, and so the reason, I mean, it's funny because at the time I think I was defining the meaning of publish and subscribe as they are right now, and I myself was using them the other way around.
It's happened to all of us.
It's like, yes, I defined it, because I didn't define it in the end. I just went through Open API and just replace get with subscribe, pause with publish, and then remove the other verbs. And that's it. So I didn't think about the perspective or anything, because it's not something that you see at first glance, right?
Yeah.
But and then I was using them the other way around. But then, like soon after, when the project started gaining some more traction, Slack announced that they were using async API for their public WebSocket API. So, and therefore it was like, oh, so this is another use case. So this is not a broker, right?
Yeah.
So it is point to point. This is client server communication. It's just happening through WebSocket, not through HTTP, but it's client server anyways. And that's completely different. So if I was changing, and I recall that, and my discussions with Jonathan as well. So Jonathan was telling me like, hey, we should change this meaning. And I was like, yeah, let's do it, because I'm working mostly with brokers myself as well. So
we should contextualize here. You and I know who Jonathan is. Jonathan is my boss at Solace.
Oh, yeah. So Jonathan Schabowski, yeah. So he's in the chat, actually. He left some messages in the chat.
I can't see the chat. I can't see the chat. So I'm sure he's making fun. No, I can't actually. I'm not logged into like the back end. But I'm sure he's telling you how brilliant I am and how I deserve praise.
So we have Tamimi and Greg.
What's up, guys?
Supporting us there with the team Canada Beavers. Sing their songs and things like this, and Jonathan, remembering the name of Vancouver that I couldn't find the name.
Nice.
So I just lost track. So what I was saying is that, what was I saying?
You're talking about WebSockets and Jonathan trying to convince you to change up the
verbs. So yeah, and I was like, yeah, let's do it. Let's just change the meaning of the verbs to like publish actually means that you're publishing to the broker, and subscribe that you're subscribing to the broker, and that will solve the problem. Cool, done, right? But no, because then you have a public WebSocket API like Slack, and it doesn't make sense anymore. It's like, what are you defining? It's like, are you defining what Slack is doing? Is it Slack is sending you a message as a client? It is weird. It is, it's not defining the API, it's defining the behavior of your application.
Right.
Are we creating a new programming language based on YAML? Fear, right? So
sure.
So it's like, I mean, it can be seen like this, but it also somehow makes sense, right? So, and also it has this other problem, which is, especially for public APIs, that is, you have servers, right? So servers are, they have a URL, on where you can reach the server, right? The address to reach the server. So if you have a public API and you say the clients should reach me on port 80, that doesn't mean that my application should be listening on port 80, because I might be listening on 5,000 or 3,000 or whatever, because I have a proxy in the middle, right? And that's very common, right? That you don't make your applications listen on port 80, because that will require root permissions usually, or extra permissions for the software to run, and that's not secure, right? So that's pretty common use case for servers, not for clients. Obviously, for clients don't have this problem. And I was trying to come up with a way of we're still trying to come up with a way of how can we make this work for both cases, right? If at some point it happens that we realize it's not possible. Look, it's impossible to have async API to work for both cases. Okay, so we choose. Let's just go for one use case, and that's it. Maybe we create another spec or a different one for, like for these other cases. I don't know.
But I think that would be really sad. I will say that we put forward a proposal, and I think that in our discussions on GitHub, I do think that the sort of one thing has to be the mirror image. Like, we're going to define one thing, and then you're going to infer the opposite. Define the server and infer that the client is the opposite. Doesn't work in these cases. And define the client and assuming that the server is the opposite doesn't work either. That's kind of the pain in the butt of asynchronous communication. So I think you and I are both on the same thing, where we have to explicitly define both the server and the client, and sort of use the verbs from the perspective of the of whatever we're particularly interested in.
So, and if you, I don't know if you recall from Lorna's episode, from the first episode, she was actually telling us that at OpenAPI they're facing the same problem. Is that they're defining the server. You can't infer the client from the definition of the server for the very same reason, right? So, like what I just said about the port is just an example. Like, you don't know what's in between the server and the client. Like, there might be different proxies or other kind of stuff in the middle that you basically don't know. So if you define the server from the perspective of the client, cool, the client will be fine. But if then you want to use the OpenAPI file to generate the server itself, the code for the server, you have a problem. It's not going to be listening where you think it's listening. It's not going to be doing what you think it's doing, right? And then you will have to understand the meaning of the verb the other way around. It's not the get means that I'm going to accept gets. It's not that I'm doing a get, right? As opposed to the client. The client is going to do a get, not accepting gets, because client cannot accept get or post because clients, not servers, right?
Totally, so, and I think it goes beyond even sort of the port stuff into even the functionality of things. And I think Lorna touched on this, and I'm going to say the name Lorna like 15 more times because I think that was a fantastic episode. That's like Seinfeld for me, that first episode with Lorna, because it's like the classic thinking out loud. So I think Lorna makes a great point that, and you have stated this before too, that it's not an either or situation. Like these applications are both publishing and subscribing, and so in there maybe there's no particular application that's going to be the mirror image either in terms of the ports or the functionality, and so we need to really lay out sort of explicitly what each of these things can do, particularly when it's not just a one-on-one scenario, but a sort of end-to-end communication where you're publishing from some people and subscribing from other people, and there's a mediation layer perhaps there. So all that the ports, the functionality all feeds into sort of the same. We need to make things more explicit rather than having an implicit sort of reversal.
And there's also this thing about the operation ID and the description fields. the summary and description fields that Łukasz Gornicki, my friend Łukasz Gornicki, raised this issue about, which is so if you define an operation ID, the operation ID is for usually it's used for programming by programming languages to name the function that is gonna, or the class or the function, whatever, that's gonna handle the message, let's say, or the operation, the publish or subscribe operation. And but if you're generating a WebSocket server, for instance, and you have the operation ID might be called on user signed up, for instance, and then you expect on the server that the server is going to subscribe to client messages and the client telling the server that a user has signed up. But if you use the same file with on user signed up on the client, then on user signed up is not expecting anything, it's sending a message. And it's a weird naming because user signed up, it's on user signed up is sending messages when by the naming it's supposed to be listening. And and the same happens with description and summary. If you have a description saying this listens for messages on the user's channel, whatever, for the server it might be good, for the client it might not be good. If we define it for the client, it might not be good for the server, and the other way around, right? So it is. So the way I see it today is that it is all mixed right now on Async API, and we just have to clear this mess. Basically, there's a. It's been great so far. Like it's been good. It's usable. You can do a lot of things with Async API still, even though it's not the greatest thing ever. But you still can do some stuff. But it's time for us to clear this mess, right? So and to separate concerns. So like make it clear, make it formal, right?
Totally. So how are we going to do it, Fran?
So someone told me that you have a proposal.
Was that someone on GitHub?
Yeah, GitHub notifications told me that you have a proposal. No, actually, maybe you want to share the screen and share your proposal. Take your time. And sure. I think it would be great if you can explain what is it about. And we don't have to go through the whole proposal because it's a long one, and
you
have 30 minutes.
It is long. Yeah, I mean, who suggested that we talk about Canada for 15 minutes? You've been using that time to actually talk.
We need 2 episodes. So yeah.
Exactly. One is the Canadian. So I will. I'll share my screen here.
Yeah.
And I'll say that. Calling it my proposal, I think this is first. I've been so impressed by the community here. I think clearly the person who created the initial idea was Lorna, and so I think she gets a ton of credit for it. But along the way, like talking with so many people in the community, Ian and Gerald from MuleSoft and from James had great feedback as well, and sort of talking with people from eBay, Shakar, and from Laurent, and people from Axway as well. Everybody sort of had their own little contribution to it, which I think is fantastic, and it's a much better proposal for it. And it's sort of like the true open source collaboration that you would always hope for, which is fantastic. So clearly, this is deriving a lot from Lorna's proposal, and essentially it creates an entity called endpoints, and sort of in the desire to have a more explicit definition, like we were talking about at the beginning. And then those endpoints interact with channels through references. And one thing that we didn't mention is there's also, beyond the perspective, there's a sort of channel reuse problem where because channels are sort of housed within applications, it's really hard to reuse them. So sort of moving channels from being very tightly intertwined with applications to sort of logical means of exchange between different endpoints. And credit to Ian for initially this was called Actor. It was switched over to Endpoint at Ian's suggestion, and I do think it sort of aligns with enterprise application integration patterns. Sort of our, if there's a Bible of async API, I feel like that is probably the Bible of async API. So that sort of channel reuse, and I think touching on sort of what we talked about at the beginning, making channels as logical as humanly possible, I think is really the key to driving this forward. And I think, again, like we talked about, we have to encompass so many different technologies at async API that, you know, we really need to sort of force the implementation specific stuff into bindings attached at either the channel or the operation level for an endpoint. Because otherwise we're never going to encompass all the particular use cases that touch on a particular implementation technology. Like, you know, WebSocket and brokers are so different that the only thing that we can say that sort of unites them together, I would say, is there's one thing on one end of the channel, there's another thing at the other end of the channel. Somehow the information goes into the channel, it's of a particular format, and somehow then goes out the other side. And that's all a channel can be, because that's the only thing I think that's going to be common across, like I said, the spectrum from WebSockets all the way over to brokers. Everything else I feel like has to be a binding. Otherwise, we're going to be sort of tied to one particular implementation. So at the heart of it, it is make channels logical, explicitly define the endpoints, no more sort of like inferring endpoints from like a reverse and trying to do that mental gymnastics, and shoving literally everything that we can into a binding, because otherwise we're never going to cover the spectrum of technologies that we encounter. So that you know, and there's a lot more in the proposal, but I think if those are sort of, that's the heart of it, the beating heart of it.
So there's still something that's not clear to me, and it's the endpoint. So what an endpoint represents, like, can you probably put an example of a real world example, like what will be an endpoint, like because
Java Spring Web Service, you know, an iPass listener on Boomi, a MuleSoft exposed API endpoint on their API management tool, IBM MQ, something that's picking up messages from IBM MQ broker. You know, all those sorts of things, essentially a program application, that type of thing.
So so for instance, an endpoint will be, let's say, a broker, like the whole broker, or a channel in the broker, or maybe the client sending and receiving messages to the broker.
Yeah, in the broker scenario, it would be all of the different forms of a client. The broker is essentially encompassed within the channel. You know, the broker is the logical means of distributing information amongst endpoints. So the broker would never be represented as an endpoint. It would always be sort of the underlying channel, and how you connect to that channel would be binding.
All right.
And also, I'm going to take this 1 second to say that I am being pinged furiously by people that work for Sols, and they say that we do support WebSockets. So do not listen to the CTO architect. We do support WebSocket.
Yeah, there you go.
There you go.
Tamimi is clarifying on the chat.
Tamimi should be on this show. I mean, I got the Canadian quiz. The dudes listening know the capability of our product. Don't listen to me. So sorry. With that taken care of. Oh, look at this guy.
So this is Tamimi clarifying. No, don't worry. You can't see the chat, but he's taking care of this. That's the rollout. I mean, he's a dev rel, right?
I mean, I'm talking. I'm doing PowerPoint presentations. I can't be like knowing all the capabilities of our product. So there you go.
You do engineering, and he fixes it for you. So that's what.
So back to the proposal. We were
Basically.
talking about means of distribution. So that's the broker case. In the case of a WebSocket, clearly there's less of a middleman there. The channel is just essentially a point-to-point connection, WebSocket connection between the endpoints, requesting information and the endpoint that's providing the information. So, again, still the same logical structure, but the binding would be significantly different. And I know that you're concerned about sort of, is this endpoint going to connect into sort of a broker using a WebSocket, or are we spawning our own WebSocket server as part of that application endpoint? To me, that seems like something that needs to be driven down into a binding specific thing. That there's sort of a WebSocket server binding and a WebSocket client binding, and so the behavior of a particular application when you're generating off of it will be driven by the binding, because really that is sort of an implementation decision.
Now you got me curious. Like moving that logic to a binding or to an implementation detail thing.
Because I think there is, now you can ponder, I'll extemporate a little bit more. So the power of keeping the channel logical is that, let's say that you start off with a WebSocket implementation that's sort of point to point. You're spawning a whole bunch of servers, and along the way you think, this isn't scaling the way that I want to scale. If we have everything logical at the channel level, then switching out your implementation is just a matter of switching out the binding. It creates this sort of separation of concerns between that there's logical interaction between these endpoints. How that happens is at the binding level, so your sort of system topology stays the same. How you're exchanging the information changes.
Yeah. Another thing. The thing is that it's not so much about how that happens, but more about the role that the application plays in the whole ecosystem of applications, let's say, or in the whole architecture of your event-driven architecture, right? You have an event-driven architecture. You have different microservices or whatever. You can call it whatever, and one of them can be a WebSocket server, and another one can be a WebSocket client, or can be a Linktivity client, and so it's not so much about an implementation detail, but more about like being clear that this specific item here, this WebSocket server, it's actually a server. Right, and we want to make it clear that this is a server and it's expecting things to be sent to him, or
as opposed to reaching out to like a broker,
or sending stuff to the client, right? So it's more about, because I think there's still value in having this information, like what's the role this application is playing, or is it playing a double role? That can also be, like, for instance. We have a public WebSocket application, a public WebSocket server for our website, and say, for instance, we have. I'm sure you heard about this example, but say we have a very simple social network, and we click the like button. And we want to send this as a WebSocket message to the server, like a new like has been clicked. Okay, then the server might want to just forward this to a broker, right? It doesn't do anything, just forward this to a broker, or might want to store it somewhere, and then forward or create a message to, I don't know, send a message to a Solus broker or to a Kafka broker or MQTT broker or whatever, right? So this server is effectively behaving as a server and as a client of the broker. So it's two things. It's behaving as two things, right? And I think that's, and I'm not saying that we should be documenting the whole flow. Like we should, I'm not saying we should be documenting the whole workflow from someone clicking on the like button to the message sent to the broker, and we should be defining all these steps, but not saying that we should be linking these steps like this one is the result of another, right? We're not creating workflows here.
Yeah.
But but um, but yeah, like this, I think this still has value, because then if we define a WebSocket server and or WebSocket application that is a server and a client at the same time, then we will have bindings for the server and bindings for the client. And then what the hell is this application, right? Is it the server? Is it the client?
Well, it's
Is
both,
it,
right? That's
well,
the thing, right?
but
And so,
but but who is like it is the server for who? Like it is a server for other people for this part of the API layer, or is it for the other part of the API layer? So for instance, if we accept the message from the like button and forward them to a broker, so imagine that we forward this to a broker also using the WebSocket protocol, right? What will happen is that we have some messages that are sent to the broker and some messages that are sent to the client, and we don't know which one is it, right? Which one is which, right? We just know that this particular entity is has two bindings, one for the server and one for the client. But now what I'm concerned about this approach is that then we lose this granularity of thinking, of saying that this is actually a server for these channels and for these messages, and it's a client for these other channels and for these other messages, right?
so I think
See what I'm going?
I do, but I don't necessarily agree that we're losing that granularity, because I think that, you know, in the endpoint, you know, in your use case, you would have an operation that would receive these user requests. It would refer to a channel, and the operation will have a binding as a WebSocket server. So that would define that it's receiving messages coming in from, you know, the outside world and acting as a WebSocket server. And it would have an additional operation that sends message as a WebSocket client.
Mm.
So the channel, you know, again, abstracting all the binding information away from the channel. You know, what we don't have, so you would have those interactions. You would know that messages come into the endpoint and it acts as a server.
Oh, I see what you're doing. Yeah,
and then you would push messages out as a WebSocket client to a broker. So the binding would contain that information, which we don't have. And I think that's a question for discussion is we don't have the causality defined there, that as a result of these messages coming in, then we push these messages out to the broker. Like,
that's fine. Yeah.
Yeah, is it fine? I don't know. Some people would say that is like Clements makes comments that says, you know, like we should define that causality, and maybe that's a valid point. That's something we talk about a lot.
Yeah, no, it is. I mean, it is for sure valuable, and I'm sure that at some point we'll address this.
Yeah.
This kind of workflows and reactions and things like this. But yeah, like for the time being, for fixing the publish and subscribe,
we got a lot of our plates already, Fran. I tend to agree.
Right? Yeah,
to me that feels like an extension. I mean that you know, once we have this sort of nailed, then we move on to other stuff. Yeah. Like I think we're interested in that, but I would agree that that's sort of down the road a bit.
So then tell me something, like, for instance, in a single async API file, we could be defining multiple clients as I'm seeing there. So it's a single async API file meant to have, for instance, your whole architecture defined in a single file.
I think the question is, I think the right response is what does your organization want to do? You know, I think that if we have the ability to list multiple endpoints in the same file, and that's what you want to do, great. If you want to keep it as a, like, you know, one endpoint per file, Great. If you don't want to use files at all, you want to use a registry. Great. I think, and even moving beyond that, do you want to have sort of a baseline endpoint defined with sort of, this is the security parameters that you have. This is sort of like, essentially a role or an interface for a particular kind of endpoint, and you want to extend it into more specific endpoints. Like, let's say we have like a vendor role endpoint, and you want to extend that into, shipping vendor endpoint.
Mm-hmm.
I think having the ability to have multiple endpoints and have endpoints extend each other gives you the flexibility to do a lot of sort of, for lack of a better term, enterprise level functionality in terms of being able to reuse things that are common across different endpoints, and then, but at the same time have very specific endpoint definitions at the same time.
So is it my understanding that endpoints should be optional?
Yes. Well, I think this dives into like a whole other topic of discussion, and I'm really interested to get your perspective on this as well. It is sort of, endpoints are optional because they're optional currently within the async API spec. And so that would provide for a level of backwards compatibility. And I think, I know you've hinted at your opinion on that. I think we have a difference of opinion on that.
No, I mean, I don't think. Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to confuse you with that. So
yeah,
the reason I was asking if it's optional or not, it's not about the backward compatibility.
Okay.
It's more about, this is, I mean, I honestly appreciate the effort that you did to keep it backward compatible, but I think we should get rid of this shit as soon as possible.
All right. Well, let's get real. Ask your question, and then let's talk about backwards compatibility, because I'm interested.
But my concern here is that if you want to let organizations decide if they want to have everything in a single file or everything split in different files, then I guess that there will be files with no endpoints, or with just one endpoint, or how does it work?
Totally.
I'm trying to wrap my head around this new concept of having the ability to define all the applications in a single file, or all the endpoints. Sorry. I'm calling application because I see that it's mapping to the current application definition of application of async API, right? So it's like you can have different applications defined in the same file. That's cool. For many use cases, this is really useful. And for some other people might argue that this is not cool, so they want to split in multiple files.
Yeah.
So now my question here is that if you have multiple files, then I guess you should make sure that each file is representing just one application / endpoint. If you have multiple files, or maybe not. I don't know. I think I'm starting to get confused with this.
Yeah, I mean, the beauty of it, or at least I think the beauty of it, is that it depends. Thanks to me. So the beauty of it is it depends. Like, does your organization want to group all of the applications for a particular domain into an async API file?
Yeah.
Done. Do you want to have your server and your client defined in the same async API file, for whatever purpose? Done. Do you want to have your internal sort of event API products in one async API file, but then the stuff you expose to the outside world in a separate async API file? Done. Do you want to have things not in the file at all? Do you want to have a registry that has all of your channels in it? That's not a physical file, but it's a database. Done. Do you want to use a schema registry for your messages? Done. I think really, because, like we talked about earlier, the number of different topologies that we have to support, I think the more flexibility, as long as, I think the more flexibility, the better.
Yeah.
Don't constrain the implementation for people, because we have no conception of how people are using this.
Well, I have to disagree with something you said now, is that the more flexibility, the better. Yes and no. So it's like, yes, I understand why you're saying this. And no, because the more flexibility, the more complexity we add to the spec, and the more difficult it will become to understand and to reason about for people, right? So right now,
Fair.
It is already. I will say that async API, it is already nowadays too complex. I would say for most people, like it is already defining too many things, like things with how bindings work with servers, and like some. I think it was Gerald. Gerald was trying to put some information and restriction on what you can put on the server inside a binding definition. So where bindings are not supposed to define these constraints, these restrictions, but I understand why he tried to do it, and so the already bindings themselves alone are introducing a lot of complexity. So if we add more complexity, more flexibility, I think it will add more complexity. So yeah, not sure if we maybe set to give users this ability to group um, files or application definitions together. Maybe there should be something on top of async API, like a layer on top of async API that will allow you to group them, like a simple spec that is just actually the name of the group and the list of files, or the list, maybe not files, but embedded async API documents inside. So just for the purpose of keeping async API simple, and application oriented, let's say, or single application oriented. And then this whole thing about people wanting to group them somehow, single group for the whole organization or different event products together, don't mind. Then you could be doing this with a new spec, a simple spec, like just name of the group and the list of async API definitions, that you want to group together, right?
To my bias is, there's different ways to introduce complexity. Introducing a whole other spec level to me seems, like it's introducing complexity as well. I think the key here, and I think that this sort of leads back to the backwards compatibility, is like how you use these pieces together. Like you can have exactly the scenario you describe, where you have one endpoint in per file, like perfectly allowed, go for it. And I think that would actually align with a lot of different topologies. But there are some topologies where that would be absolutely horrible, where you have 4,000 different microservices and you don't want to have 4,000 different async API files floating around. And plus, we have, by introducing these sort of channel concept and by allowing the channels to be in their own files potentially, because I do think that the reuse points to that sort of model. You're already sort of allowing things to be grouped and complicating that. So it seems like allowing there to be more than one endpoint per file isn't introducing a lot more complexity for granting a lot of flexibility. So to me, it seems like that balance actually weighs in favor of having multiple endpoints.
So I find it funny with something you said, like you have 4,000 microservices and you don't want to have 4,000 async API files floating around, but you want to have 4,000 repos or 4,000 applications, because they're organized, they're managed probably by different teams, and like you usually have a repo per microservice, or at least a folder per microservice. So I think it makes sense. The same way you have the code separated in each microservice to have the async API definition together with the code, like closer to the code, right? That's why we keep async API single application focused, because we think it's a unit. Like the microservice in this case is a unit, and it's like um, I think it makes sense to have these 4,000 async API files, because the same way you have, I don't know, if your 4,000 um, microservices are greeting in Java, then you probably have 4,000 pom.xml files, right? So the same way, and you don't want to have all the pom files in a single file, right?
Well,
Because then,
that's absolutely true. Yeah.
because if you merge them together, then aren't you introducing coupling? Like if you have everything between the services, like if you want to independently deploy a new service that changed the API, you're introducing coupling, because imagine in the case of CI, where deployment is done automatically, and in the case of CD, actually CI/CD, um, you might change the async API file, and then it regenerates code or whatever, and it auto deploys.
Yeah.
It's going to change a file that is going to affect the 4,000 microservices. So is it going to deploy the 4,000 microservices just because you changed one single microservice? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So isn't it like, aren't we introducing the coupling that we're trying to avoid with microservices and event-driven architecture?
You raise an interesting point. I
You
think
know?
I probably have to take that away and think about that more.
Yeah,
I agree. I mean,
I think I think we need to, of course, we need to think about it. Like we all need to. It's just not just for you, but like for the audience as well, for the community to think about it. Like, um, that's why I raised this point of saying like maybe we can create another top layer simple spec that will give you the ability to group them together, and then for those who don't want to group things together, because they're doing microservices or they just doing one or two or whatever, then they don't have to think about endpoints or groups or anything, right? They just go and define whatever they're doing, and that's it. But for those who really want to have this ability, they can have this separate file that will be linking to each individual file, or you can be embedding these files inside a single file, and then it's up to you. It's like there's pros and cons for each use case, of course. The thing is that, for instance, in the case of tooling, it will be much simpler to create tooling if we don't merge everything in a single place, because you don't have to consider this case from tooling perspective. You only consider one application at a time. You don't consider the option that there might be multiple endpoints applications, right? Then there will be some other tooling for helping you group them, right? Anyway,
Yeah. I mean, I can
I
see that
think
perspective, but
like
I'll take it
it is
away.
thinking out loud, right? I'm
Yeah,
not saying
exactly.
that I'm not saying that I'm right and you're wrong, or you're right
Sure.
and I'm wrong. This is for people watching as this is thinking out loud. So this is really thinking out loud. I I
But
have the I have a problem that some people already raised on my face sometimes, that I sometimes sound like I am, like saying this is like this and it should be like this, and it's like I'm just thinking aloud. And
sure.
sorry if it sounds like I'm saying that no, your point is not valid, mine is. No, I'm just trying to raise another point, another
Sure.
line
But I
of
think
thought,
your point
right?
about coupling is actually really interesting, and it's something I should think about more because yeah, the sort of yeah the pushing together of endpoints is interesting and does sort of go run counter, I think, to a lot of the microservice you know conception of a microservice. So yeah,
Also think about it, maybe this is something that Solaz and tooling can provide, like grouping the definitions, right?
man,
um,
it's like we should create like an event registry of some sort.
Exactly. So, I mean, this is something that you could be providing, and you already provide, but like other companies could be providing, other products can be providing,
Sure.
and but yeah, I mean that's a really, I mean, forget about that. What I just said, like this is a really bad reason to or argument against that. It's just, um, yeah, if something can be defined in a standardized way between Solas and any other product vendors, that would be even better, right?
Sure.
So yeah, that's a really bad point from my side. Um, so I think I have a better understanding of your proposal now. It took me a while to digest it, because you've been pinging me, and I was constantly saying like, sorry, I have to find time to read it, and I was reading it and I was like, what? I was confused. So now it is much clearer to me. So thanks for this whole explanation of your proposal. I think it raises a few interesting points. That's now that I'm seeing you. That's a good thing. I'm gonna share your proposal with
Yeah, we got.
audience.
I mean, I know we're out of time, but I do think we should talk about. And I think this is more of a philosophical thing. Is sort of the backwards compatibility, and I totally agree with you that it would be nice to sweep everything away and start fresh. But that's just not
Please.
realistic of where. And I'll use a kinder term than you did.
I know, but this is a spec, right? So we're trying to, and even though it's version 2, version 3, version 4,
Yeah.
We should, in my opinion, and also Lucas' opinion and other people from the community opinion, that we already raised this topic before. Like, I think we should be like the specs will be constantly changing, like being developed, and it will be the tooling providing a facade so for these changes. So the tooling, the parsers, should be able to give you the abstract entities of the spec. So for instance, if I want to know, so your API, your tooling should have a method or something saying, give me all the messages that are being published to this channel. Then if it's version 2 of the spec, it will go and look on the subscribe method. And if it's version 3, it probably have to go to and look in another place. But your code should remain the same, right? Your code, the call that you're doing should be abstracting you away from the spec, from the spec definition, which is not the current case, right? The current case is the tooling is, the parser is mapped to the structure of the spec, and that's something that we want to change as well. Like we want to create parsers that.
I hear what you're saying. I the sort of the intent-driven parsing. I guess I would counterpoint and say that the coding that you're doing isn't the only coding that's occurring around async API. There's a ton of people that have devoted a lot of time, that we know about, and then stuff that we have no idea about because it's a public standard and people use it internally. And so there's been a lot of blood, sweat, and tears put into coding around async API, and to say, well, sorry, we screwed it up. Here's this other stuff that you now have to do. I think is pretty would be painful to me as a developer, and costly as a business to change. And I think also, I think it's tough to portray like, I do think that we know what we're doing. But I do think there is a hit to our credibility when we have to change things and don't give people a chance to bring it back.
So yeah, so I see what you say. Like, I understand, and that's one of the reasons I've been like pushing this aside. Like, don't release this yet, because I really want to publish a new version of async API, a new major version that has a breaking change, right? Not just with the publish subscribe changes. So it actually offers you something more, right?
Sure.
some further improvements, right? So that's why we're like, I'm always saying like, hey, we should be cautious with. I mean, we don't want to be breaking the spec all the time, or we don't want to either be um, holding the spec just because we're afraid that it's gonna break other people's businesses or anything. Uh, so we need to find like a fine balance, right? And in my opinion, this is like, if we introduce changes to publish and subscribe right now, if we fix this whole thing about publish and subscribe, this gives nothing to the end user. There's no benefit for the end user. For the end user writing the spec, yes. For the business behind the spec, there's no benefit, right? We're not providing any benefit. We're just providing more clarity when you're writing the spec, but that's it. Like,
Which
we're
I
not
think is benefit
providing any.
in its own. Like if you have to train your developers for a half hour and
Yeah,
explain to them the spec, and
yeah,
I feel like the tooling support is also lagging because it's
yeah,
really hard to pick it up and understand it. Yeah, and one of your goals for the vision is, for people to start making contributions in a faster way.
yeah.
I think that, and that in turn leads to better tooling and more business value. I think creating clarity around these sort of terms actually, in a not very, but an indirect way, creates business value.
So there's something related to that. Like, for instance, there are many people asking for request reply patterns on top of messaging, on top of brokers, right? So so I think the way it is right now, the way the spec is right now, it will be super hard for us to introduce this request reply functionality. It will just add more complexity to the existing spec. So imagine that you have to you want to have request reply, but what you add is a reply option to the subscribe verb.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
It creates very weird scenarios. I agree.
It's like, yeah, so it's like, yeah, I understand that there are some people that devoted a lot of time to create their own tools and to parse async KPI as well. But yeah, this, I don't think we should be carrying this forward. It's like, this is too much, because then it's going to be painful for people always. It's always going to be the same. It's going to continue being painful.
I agree, but I feel like there's a way forward that's a little bit more gentle than just pushing
So
people off, pushing off the cliff.
The way that I will do it myself is, let's just provide ready to use tooling. So especially the parsers, which are the ones that are in charge of reading the spec. If you're not using our tools, in this sense, you don't get any benefit. But another thing that we can do in the meantime is we keep maintaining version 2. So we keep adding features to version 2 for some time. And we start telling you that you should start migrating, because next year, for instance, we'll stop supporting version 2, or in 2 years, or, and then you have some time now to react. It's not that from one day to another you are like, oh, fact, I'm left alone here with my old async KPI stuff that doesn't work anymore, right? So so we thought about it as well. Like, we're not going to stop maintaining version 2. So version 2 will continue to evolve, like 2.3, 2.4, whatever, right? Or the tooling supporting version 2 will continue to evolve as well. But new features, new key features, I will say, like request reply, shouldn't be added to version 2. I think they should be added to version 3, where the breaking change is. So there's a motivation for people, for businesses, to start migrating with time, right? So that's
yeah. I mean, I hear you on that. I hear you on that as well. Yeah, there's no real great way around it. I would say that, some people like the way that things are defined right now. They've built a business around providing async API capabilities. And I think, and then they like the way that async API is structured right now. And so to force them off even eventually may be hard, I would say. Harder than perhaps anticipate. And I think by allowing, and I do think that there is, hopefully would be a more natural, trying not to make mistakes. I agree. Yeah. That's always the business benefit. I would assume that the time saved trying not to make mistakes would be because you're not forgetting what publish and subscribe means.
That's a good one.
I assume so.
Yeah.
If maybe they can follow up with another comment. So to me, it seems like having like a forked development process where people are working on like 2 versions, you know how forks work. That it's always difficult to try to make this functionality work, especially when you're dealing with such very, very different things. So to me, it makes sense to move forward with one single version with backwards compatibility, and then hopefully people will see sort of the benefit of more explicit definitions of applications, and that will hopefully sort of the implicit will sort of die off a more natural death without having to pull people away by shocking them. To me, that seems like a more friendly approach.
Yeah, this is something that we'll definitely have to think about even more. We don't want to screw anyone. That's take it for granted. So,
is it weird for you to be have such a responsibility? And I know you portray it as like an open source community, and then clearly it is. But like you have you're like this big boy that like has to like make at least weigh in on the decision.
I don't take decisions anymore. So it is decision by consensus. So it is by consensus. So it's not going to be my decision. Same with these proposals for publish and subscribe. I'm just trying to drive it forward.
That's actually a great segue. Like, how do you envision this process moving forward? Because I think there's a sort of a general agreement that like something's going to happen. So how do you see that thing happening? Because it feels like there's a GitHub and that's great for discussion, but then like it feels like there's got to be some sort of like push to get this done because this is like a big deal.
I think, as you know, I'm going to make my own proposal. So I'm going to publish my own proposal that I already started.
What?
I'm going to push mine, which is like...
I'm supposed to be surprised, Fran?
No. It's not surprised, but I didn't want to share before, just, for respect to all of you, right? So I don't want to bias anyone towards my spec or my proposal, sorry, or towards... Or the contrary, right? Like, so I wanted to keep it like, so I should clarify, like, you are the last one doing this series of publish subscribe thinking out loud episodes. So we're not going to talk about publish subscribe in thinking out loud anymore, right? At least that's the hope, right? That's the hope. So
it dies with me.
So my hope is like, it dies with you here. So you have a proposal. There's some other people doing proposals. I recall Michael Davis made another proposal, but he admittedly said that that is not really the best way to tackle this problem. It has issues, right? So I'm gonna make another proposal. I'm just gonna try to mix in my proposal what I've learned, of course, myself all these years, but also what I've learned from you during these episodes and during this, this GitHub discussion and thinking about and talking to many of you offline as well, giving you my feedback, giving me your feedback. Sorry, So I'm just trying to I'm just gonna try to compile everything there, but that's a proposal. That's what I was saying. Like, it doesn't mean it's going to happen like this. You can all vote like saying, no, we don't like your proposal, Fran. Right? So it's like, I mean, you all, I mean, the maintainers of the spec, right? Which I think they are still, I don't know if they're defined yet. I think they're defined.
You should work on that.
Yeah, yeah, you know that we moved to Linux Foundation recently, and this is the new governance model is it is just getting started, right? But in any case, if I think the defined maintainers is Lucas and I right now, if I'm not mistaken. But of the spec, we want to invite more people to become maintainers, so to have a vote, right? But even though it's Lucas and I right now, I'm not gonna play the role of a dictator here. So I'm just gonna listen to what all of you have to say, right? Of course, if you just jump there and say like, no, I don't like your proposal, Fran, uh, I'm gonna say like, yeah, I don't like you. So, but if you give me reasons, reasonably reasons of why it shouldn't be done, and we have discussion there, then I think we can all come up with a solution that it's good enough for everyone, right? So it we may have to um, do some like to allow some trade-offs ourselves. Like what I would love to see myself as a perfect solution is it is not what I'm gonna propose. So my perfect solution is not my proposal. My proposal is, as I said, like a combination of all your ideas and thoughts and feedback. But it's also not going to be your perfect solution. It's not going to be Lorna's perfect solution, and everyone's perfect solution. So because everyone has opinions, so yeah, it's not going to be perfect for anyone. But I think and I hope that we can get a good enough proposal to move forward and to leave the spec in a healthy status, so we can keep building on top of that for years without any introducing any breaking change anymore, right?
Totally.
So,
But I mean, how do you
and
envision that happening like at a practical level? Like, I feel like GitHub is great, sort of, because it's asynchronous and we are async API. But at some level, like, just talking with you and seeing you talk with Lorna and seeing you talk with Dale and you talk with Michael has been really, really beneficial. Would you envision sort of, a working group that that could actually meet in person and
no,
sort of grind through this?
no, I don't. I don't think we should be creating working groups because that implicitly leaves some people out. We don't want to leave anyone out, right? So I think we should be as open as possible. Um, we follow the open governance approach. Node.js has been following this approach for years, and it's working well. Even though if you don't like JavaScript, but Node.js is working well. The the organization. Um, and I think we should follow this model as well. Like we should keep allowing anyone to jump in and give and leave thoughts. Of course, at some point, we'll have to stop listening, let's say, and taking a decision. Of course, this decision is what I was talking about, the proposals. We can be working on a specific proposal. Like we just work on a proposal. Everyone can work on a proposal. If that's not going to be perfect either, so there will be people pissed off by our decisions. I'm sure, but I'm sorry, like I cannot please everyone, right? I'm not a Canadian, so
Neither am I. So I mean, there you go.
so sorry for Canadians, but but yeah, you know what I mean. So it's like it's not going to be perfect, but it's transparent. Actually, so Chris was just um, raising this topic. Um, so the process, let me just share with people wondering what the process looks like. It is defined in our organization charter, right?
Also, I'll point out that I also cherish 1980 as well. Great year.
Yes. So I'm sharing the charter there in the chat. And
You
the
want to share
process is
you want to share your screen, friend? I'll stop sharing.
that's okay. Yeah. Let me just. Oh man, too many things. I'm not gonna share my screen. I'm gonna share this. Okay. Yeah, because it's a long document. It's a long legal document. It's boring to read, and it's a lot of time. So, but there is a process defined. So for those who don't have access later in the recording to the chat, there you can find it. It's on the .github repository. So the thing is that we're gonna keep inviting people to leave opinions. After this proposal is merged, and maybe after, I mean, I'm saying after, but there may be other proposals in the middle being merged, right, on version 2. So most probably in the next months, we'll be inviting new people to become maintainers and therefore voters, people with the right to vote, um, to the spec, right, to the specification. Because let's clarify that this whole thing goes by repo, right? So each repo has its set of owners, code owners, right, which are the maintainers or the people with voting rights. And who are these people that we're gonna invite to join as maintainers? The people who has been working on the spec, no more, no less. If you work on the spec continuously, if you keep pushing, if you keep contributing, you'll become a maintainer eventually. It's just if you keep pushing, you'll become a maintainer as well, of course. So you know what I mean. So it's like we're trying to be as transparent as possible here, and I want to remove as much responsibility from myself as possible as well. Like, because otherwise, yeah, we're a Linux Foundation project, we have a charter, blah 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 blah. But in the end, Frank decides. No, I want to remove this, and that's why I'm also strictly not allowing offline conversations, trying to convince me to go one way or the other. I've had this, people politicking with me, offline, trying to convince me to go one way or the other. No way, I'm not going to allow this. And if someone is thinking about doing this and is watching this, no, don't do it. So
Don't call
so
Fran. Don't call him.
open a
Don't ping him.
damn issue, open a damn issue, and let's have a public discussion. So
Well,
that's the way, right?
so I mean, there's public discussion, right? But there's also different formats of public discussion, right? Like I totally agree. Like I said, I use working group. I would say a working group is whoever is interested enough to devote the time to it. But I do feel like having a real-time interactive discussion with whoever's interested in having that real-time interactive discussion is really valuable. I think this is proof positive of that right now. So I think that I would advocate for anyone who's interested, show up. I'll show up in the middle of the night and talk about it, because I do feel like sort of doing it in real time and being able to respond in real time and sort of ask probing questions like you did today, I think has real value to it.
So I partially agree with you, but something that I've been feeling in my years as an engineer and later as a manager is that what I've been feeling is and noticing is that there are many people who don't open their mouth in public, not in public, in group. When they are in a group conversation, they don't open their mouth. They have thoughts, they have really good thoughts, and they're afraid to open their mouth because it's like, this is not, I'm not smart enough like them or something. While if it's offline, asynchronous like this, leaving a comment is just differently. And this is the number one reason I'm doing this episodes one by one. And that's why I'm not inviting, I could have been inviting you and Michael, who work together, to a single call and have the call of the three of us. But then one of you probably is going to be dominating the conversation. And I don't want that.
Michael's a lot better looking than I am too. So, I mean, that would not be a good situation for me either.
So I want to avoid that as well. Like people dominating conversations, and there's egos, there's a lot of things. There's lack of ego as well sometimes. And I'm trying to be like as flexible as possible there. And I think this asynchronous discussion it is good, and also it's impossible for all of us to be in a single call at the same time because we have people in Australia, America, and Europe. So someone is gonna be at 11 or 2 a.m. 11 p.m. or 2 a.m. Having a call, which is not cool, and you will not have the best version of this person in a live call, and also I hate taking decisions in meetings, and it is good to have these conversations, this thinking out loud process, thinking aloud, right? And that's cool. But then decisions will be taken offline and with time, so people can think about it well, and also for the sake of transparency as well. So yeah, so
Well, if you
we
change
should
your
be as
mind,
transparent as
I
possible.
will I will volunteer for 2 a.m. duty. I've had an infant, so I'm more than capable of operating at 2 a.m. in the morning.
You don't have to, man. You don't have to. We're gonna do it asynchronously. We're using KPI, as you said. We could do it asynchronously,
It
and
does
and
fit the charter.
you're gonna be part of the working group because you already made the proposal, so you're working on that, right?
There you
So,
go.
but yeah. So yeah. Before we finish, because we're way
We're way over
uh,
time.
over time, like, but
We talked about Canada for like 15 minutes. We should not have done that. That's all on
that's fine. That's fine. When it's a funny conversation, when it's a interesting conversation, I always like to keep it. So it's the end of the episode, and as we are approaching the end of the episode, I always ask people to leave a question for the next guest. But before that, I'm gonna remind you
Yeah.
what was a question that the Michael left to you. Okay, so
So yeah, so that's a thought. And so now it's your time. We'd love to ask you to ask a question for the next guest.
Hmm.
Even though I was going to say, even though you don't know who he is, but you know who he is, so you're probably
I know who
biased.
he is, and I know what you're going to be talking about too. So, yeah, that's a tough one. That's the one thing I forgot to do to prepare is think of the question for the next guest.
I
Um,
love it.
but but I'll just say the first thing that comes to mind. I know that Jesse's going to present his proposal that introduces the concept of endpoints. So I would like to ask him um, if there is a way we can kind of merge in what I presented earlier about the idea of roles in with that can I somehow come up with a definition of an application that says, rather than me saying, yes, I am an endpoint and this is what I do, sort of say, well, I have these roles that might involve multiple endpoints, and how can I pull those in without, you know, being redundant, I guess. So it'll probably be a challenge for Jesse because he probably doesn't really know what I'm talking about because the idea is very fuzzy in my mind too. But um, hey,
But that's
let's have fun.
that's
Let's,
perfect.
yeah.
so I have
Michael
I
was
have
crystal
this.
clear. Your question wasn't a serious one. It was a good serious one, man. I like it because we actually talked about that previously in this conversation. Like the benefit of explicitly another benefit of explicitly defining endpoints is that you could then inherit or extend endpoints. Where if you want to again have endpoints that are not true endpoints but rather define a role, you could then through a reference inherit or reference those roles and then potentially extend them as an endpoint. So, the certain roles have capabilities. Your implementation of an endpoint uses those roles through reference to gain those capabilities, and then you extend them. So I do think that there is a a good use case for what Michael's talking about. I understood it immediately, even though wasn't a serious one. I think it was actually a great one. I do think that it's an important thing for us to think about seriously because I think it touches upon, particularly when we're exposing our sort of our API to external entities. What we're really doing is giving them a particular role, and then their implementation follows on from that particular role that we're giving them. So in other words, like we're saying as a organization, external person, you can do this with us. You can receive these types of messages from us. You can publish these types of messages to us. What that external organization chooses to do is sort of a separate async API that is dependent upon that endpoint definition. And I'm being fuzzy now too. This is sort of laid out more in the proposal. I've been talking for like an hour and a half.
Yeah.
So I totally understand Mike's question. I do think there's a role for roles, and I would encourage you to check out the proposal, where hopefully I'm a little bit more coherent. But I feel like I don't want to be gypped out of my chance to ask a question. And I feel like it's natural that you would be the next person in line, since you are, I can't believe it, putting forward your own proposal, which is a total surprise to me. Do I get to ask you a question?
So I'm not going to be presenting my proposal live on Thinking Out Loud. So I'm going to just leave my proposal on GitHub for anyone who wants to read. But I'm not going to be doing an episode just for myself to present my proposal. That will be like super.
It'll be a really interesting conversation.
So,
but let me ask you a question anyway. Then,
what do you think, Fran? Nice. I love it.
It's a mirror. So my question is, if we put forward and pass an async API 3.0 proposal, will you breakdance live?
But that's not for the next guest. That's for me.
That's for you. Yeah. Well, I mean, you're sort of kind of the next guest. So
I'm not the guest. I'm the host.
Okay. Well, regardless.
Okay, I can. So I can answer that. I will not break dance, but I will share a video of mine breakdancing.
That's even better. Even better.
Yeah. And but please leave a question for the next guest. Whatever is on top of your mind.
Okay.
Doesn't have to be publish subscribe related. It can be
sure. Because I don't really even know what the next topic is. I would say, what is one suggestion that you feel like could improve how the async API community operates?
Love it. Yeah, that's a good one. And related to that, so Chris was just asking, like, how can people be invited to vote? And I don't want to skip this question. So just to make it clear for those who are watching, you are not invited to vote. So only the maintainers, the people nominated as maintainers on each repo can vote. So for that, you have to become a maintainer to have the right to vote. And to become a maintainer, you have to like, not continuously, but you often have to be contributing to async API, to this specific repo, right? So if you want to be a maintainer of the spec, you should be contributing to the spec often. And contributing can be making proposals, reviewing other proposals, giving feedback. I don't know. There are many ways of contributing, right? So yeah, that's how you get to vote. We never had to vote yet, because all the decisions are made on a pull request level, and on the pull request we decide by consensus there if usually we all agree, and that happens that we all agree on a solution, and voting is only left for those cases where people cannot reach a consensus on the pull request. So then this bubbles up, and then actually the whole technical steering committee can vote, and the technical steering committee is composed by all the maintainers of all the repos on async API. So yeah. So that's we hope that this never happens, we hope that we can friendly reach consensus on a pull request level or an issue level, if you want. So, for instance, this publish subscribe, we hope to reach consensus. Consensus doesn't mean that we have to be all of us should be happy with the solution, but at least the majority of us will be happy with the solution, right? So
yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question. Is consensus 50% plus one? What do you feel like that is?
So consensus is usually that I will say that is not 50% plus one. I will say it's usually everyone, right? Like everyone agrees. Consensus is that we all agree on something. But when consensus is not reached, then we have to go through other systems, which is voting basically, and there it's by majority, which is 50% plus one. I think it's on the charter. I don't even recall anymore what we did there because we changed it, then we changed it back, then we changed it again. So I don't recall what we did in the end. But it's listed there. I don't have to remember. It's listed. It's defined there. The whole voting process is there, and how we make decisions, and yeah. So we hope that we don't ever need to vote. That will be that we are great people that can get to a consensus. That would be perfect. So with all of that, Jesse, thanks for joining me today. I really appreciate this conversation. It's been a long conversation because it's been an interesting conversation.
It has.
So,
agreed.
So yeah, and yeah. So thanks a lot, and really appreciate that you joined me. And yeah, I hope that we can see your proposal moving forward, and we can at some point merge all the proposals into single one, and then yeah, come to a consensus.
Awesome, man. Have a good day.
Thank you. Have a good day, you too. Bye bye. Bye everyone.